I sat frozen at our dining room table, staring at the email that had just appeared on my laptop screen. Wellness consultant contract, approved, read the subject line. The attachment showed my husband Daniel's signature next to that of Olivia Jenkins, authorizing her $12,000 monthly retainer plus immediate housing at the executive residence for proximity to leadership during the critical product launch phase. Our address was listed under executive residence. My home. The woman I'd met last week at our dinner party, introduced as Northwest Innovation's new corporate wellness strategist, would be moving into our guest suite. The guest suite adjacent to Daniel's home office, where he'd been working late nights for months while I slept alone down the hall. A notification pinged on my phone, a calendar invite from Daniel titled Home Office Arrangements, Discuss with Becca. Scheduled for tomorrow. He was giving me less than 24 hours notice before moving his mistress into our home under the guise of a corporate consulting contract. 8 years of marriage reduced to a calendar notification and a forwarded contract I was never meant to see. A contract accidentally included in a batch of patent documents sent to me. Not as Daniel Wilson's wife, but as Rebecca Carter, the anonymous engineering consultant who had designed the sustainability algorithm that powered Northwest Innovation's entire green technology platform. What Daniel didn't know, what he had never bothered to discover during our entire marriage, was that the independent contractor who held the core patents to his company's most profitable technology wasn't some reclusive genius he'd never met. It was his wife. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in my private office on the 3rd floor of our Bellevue Lake House, surrounded by the engineering awards I'd kept hidden from my husband. Outside, rain pelted against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lake Washington, the Seattle skyline hazy in the distance across the water. For years, I'd played the role of Rebecca Wilson, supportive wife to Daniel Wilson, the charismatic CEO of Northwest Innovations. I'd hosted his business dinners, appeared at his side during company functions, and listened patiently as he explained sustainable technology concepts that I had literally written the book on, my name carefully, obscured by a pseudonym and an LLC my father had helped me establish before his death. Meanwhile, Rebecca Carter, the brilliant engineer whose algorithms had transformed a struggling startup into a green technology powerhouse, communicated with Northwest Innovations exclusively through encrypted emails, video conferences with her, camera disabled due to connectivity issues, and technical documents couriered through a private service. I remember the moment we met, 8 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. Daniel had approached me at the networking reception, introduced himself as an up-and-coming sustainable tech entrepreneur, and asked what I did. I work in engineering, I'd said simply. Oh, software? Data entry? He'd replied automatically. I hadn't corrected him. It had seemed simpler then, less complicated, to let him believe I was a junior-level programmer at a competing firm. I'd built the Carter sustainability algorithm after completing my dual engineering and MBA degrees at Stanford. My father, a lifelong environmental scientist, had worked with me on the initial concept before cancer took him too soon. The algorithm could optimize energy consumption in real time across complex systems, reducing both costs and environmental impact. It was revolutionary, but I'd seen too many women in tech have their work undervalued, dismissed, or outright stolen. So when Northwest Innovations, then a small startup with big ambitions, approached R. Carter Consulting about licensing the technology, I maintained my carefully constructed anonymity. And when Daniel, the company's ambitious new CEO, began dating me without ever connecting me to the technology powering his rising success, I found myself living in a strange experiment of my own making. Some might call it deception. I called it self-preservation. Our prenuptial agreement had been meticulously constructed. He thought to protect his superior assets and future earnings. He never questioned why I insisted on maintaining my LLC and consulting practice. A little independence is healthy, I'd explained. He'd found it adorably unambitious compared to his grand vision of transforming the global energy landscape. And now he'd brought his mistress into our home under the transparent guise of a wellness consultant, using company funds to maintain her in luxury while preparing to push me aside. The door to my private office opened. Grace Matthews entered, tablet in hand. My closest friend since college, and the only executive at Northwest who knew that the CEO's wife was also the anonymous consultant whose technology had built the company. As CFO, she had carefully maintained the financial arrangements that kept R. Carter Consulting separate from my personal identity. "He's really doing it," she said without preamble. "Security just issued keycard access to Olivia Jenkins for all executive areas, including your home. Marcus flagged it for me immediately." I nodded, remaining outwardly calm though my fingers tightened around my coffee mug. "And the contract?" "Approved this morning. $12,000 monthly retainer for executive wellness services, plus housing, allowance and travel budget. Backdated to start 3 months ago, with a lump sum payment already issued. The planning, the calculated deception, it must have been happening for months while he slept beside me, ate meals I prepared, attended events where he proudly introduced me as his wife." Grace's expression tightened. "There's more. The new product, Aunch, the whole home sustainability system. He's planning to announce at next week's board meeting that they've developed it in-house." My stomach dropped. The whole home system was my latest innovation, the product of 2 years of intensive work. Under our contract, Northwest was required to acknowledge R. Carter Consulting as the technology developer and pay significant royalties on all applications. "He can't do that," I said quietly. "The contract explicitly prohibits." He's claiming, "They've made substantial modifications that constitute a new invention," Grace interrupted. "Legal is already preparing documentation to challenge your patent rights." The betrayal had layers, each one more calculated than the last. Not only was he bringing his mistress into our home, but he was also attempting to steal my life's work, the technological legacy my father and I had built together. I turned to look out at the rain-swept lake, watching storm clouds gather over the Seattle skyline. "He doesn't know about the board meeting tomorrow," I said quietly. "No," Grace confirmed. "The emergency session is scheduled, but as always, the executive participants are listed by title, not name." The meeting where I had planned to finally reveal my identity to the board, a revelation I'd been working toward for months as I grew tired of the double life. I'd intended to suggest a formal merger between R. Carter Consulting and Northwest Innovations, bringing my patents fully in-house in exchange for an appropriate leadership position. Daniel knew nothing about it. "What do you want to do?" Grace asked, her voice gentle but practical. The storm outside was intensifying, lightning flashing across the darkening sky. 8 years of compartmentalizing my life, of listening to Daniel explain my own technology to me, of smiling through business dinners where he dismissed female engineers as too detail-oriented for true innovation. All of it crashed through the careful walls I'd built between my personal and professional lives. I thought about the nights. I'd slipped out of bed to answer urgent technical questions from Northwest's development team, explaining to a half-awake Daniel that my insomnia sometimes led me to work on small coding projects. The vacations interrupted because of family emergencies that were actually critical system failures requiring my immediate attention. The condescending way he'd pat my hand when I expressed opinions about energy policy, assuring me that these matters were too complex for non-specialists. I'd maintained the charade partly out of a desire for normalcy, for a relationship untainted by power dynamics, but I'd also known, deep down, that Daniel had shown me exactly who he was from the beginning. He'd never seen me. He'd seen the version of me that fit his worldview, and now he'd proven just how limited that vision really was. "Rebecca," Grace prompted. I turned from the window, my decision crystallizing with the clarity that had designed algorithms to power cities. Cancel the merger presentation for tomorrow, I said, my voice calm and measured. Instead, prepare a complete review of all patent agreements between Northwest and R. Carter Consulting. Compile evidence of any contract violations, especially related to the whole home system development. Grace nodded, already making notes on her tablet. And have Marcus discreetly retrieve my backup drives from the safe at headquarters. I want all my original work secured off-site by tonight. What about Daniel and the woman? Grace asked. Lightning flashed again, closer now, illuminating my reflection in the window. CEO, engineer, betrayed wife. Let them proceed exactly as planned, I said. Tomorrow, the board will learn exactly who R. Carter really is, and what happens when you build your entire company on someone else's genius while taking them for granted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For 8 years, I'd allowed Daniel to believe he was married to a shadow of who I really was. Tomorrow, the full reality would dawn on him with the harsh clarity of the truth he'd been too arrogant to see. He'd invited his mistress into our home, thinking he was pushing me aside for someone more valuable to his future. He had no idea that I was about to return the favor. We've all experienced that moment when someone shows you exactly who they are, when the mask drops and you see the truth you've been avoiding. Perhaps you've felt that stomach-dropping sensation of betrayal, the cold realization that someone you trusted has been living a double life in right front of you. But what happens when you're the one with the secret identity? If you're new to my channel, welcome. I share these stories not just for entertainment, but because there's power in witnessing the moment when underestimation meets reality. That satisfying instant when someone who thought they were clever discovers they weren't. Seeing the full picture. For those who've been following along, you know I don't believe in simple revenge tales. This isn't about getting even, it's about reclaiming your power when someone tries to take it from you. Before we dive deeper into this journey, take a moment to hit that subscribe button below. It's completely free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss another story of justice served with a side of perfect timing. Let's return to that moment in my lakeside home when I realized my husband hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd underestimated the woman he claimed to know better than anyone else. A mistake that would cost him everything he thought he had built. What do you do when someone tries to replace you in your own home? When they attempt to steal your life's work while dismissing your capabilities? When they bring another woman into the space you've created, thinking you'll simply step aside? If you're me, you take a deep breath, you straighten your shoulders, and you prepare to remind them exactly who they're dealing with. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person isn't the one planning a betrayal. It's the one they never truly saw in the first place. The Seattle tech industry operates on unspoken rules as modern as its gleaming tower offices. It's a world of brilliant minds in casual attire, of quiet deals made over craft coffee, of innovations that transform daily life while operating by their own internal logic. My life existed in perfect compartmentalization. During business hours, R. Carter was the reclusive engineering genius whose algorithms had transformed Northwest Innovations from a struggling startup into the third-largest sustainable technology company in North America. My innovations were implemented by teams who received detailed specifications through carefully managed channels, never questioning why they never met the mind behind the technology. But each evening, I would transform into Rebecca Wilson, supportive wife to a CEO with outsized ambitions. I'd listen to Daniel explain industry movements I'd predicted, nodding as he simplified concepts I'd pioneered. Our home reflected this duality perfectly. Daniel had insisted on the Lakeside Bellevue address, prestigious enough to impress investors and board members, with water views and enough space to entertain. The decorating choices were all his. Minimalist furniture arranged to showcase. The lake views. A dedicated media room where he entertained clients. Walls decorated with his company awards and press clippings. My presence was minimized to tasteful touches he'd barely notice. Technical books hidden behind decorative covers, sophisticated monitoring systems disguised as smart home features, and a third-floor office he rarely entered, believing it to be where I managed my small consulting business and pursued my hobby projects. He called it my creative space, with the indulgent affection of someone humoring a child. What he never realized was that I had designed our smart home with two completely separate networks, a voice-activated security system only I could control, and a secure server room disguised as a storage closet. Just as he never questioned why, I insisted on managing my own finances separately, maintaining the LLC my father had helped me establish before his death. In the tech world, power is measured in innovation, disruption, and intellectual property. The right patents, the right applications, the right market timing, each its own currency more valuable than stock options or venture capital. Daniel had risen to CEO through a combination of charm, vision, and strategic relationship building. He worked hard, certainly, but his career had benefited from an invisible foundation: my technology. The patents and algorithms that made Northwest's products exceptional weren't his creations, despite how often he referred to our engineering team's breakthrough work in interviews. I, meanwhile, had built my technology through pure innovation. When my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer shortly after I finished my degrees, we'd worked together to develop the initial framework for what would become the Carter Sustainability algorithm. His environmental science expertise combined with my engineering and business training had created something revolutionary, a way to optimize energy consumption that could be applied across homes, businesses, even entire cities. After he died, I'd refined the technology in relative isolation, aware that as a young woman in tech, I'd face countless barriers to having my work recognized. The choice to remain anonymous hadn't been made lightly, but it had protected what mattered most: the integrity of the innovation and my ability to control its application. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd applied the same strategy to my marriage. Our social circle straddled both worlds while keeping them separate. Industry, events, charity galas, dinner parties, I navigated them all with practiced ease. The wives of Daniel's business associates knew me as the supportive spouse who remembered their children's names and always asked thoughtful questions about their interests. They never connected me to the mysterious R. Carter whose technology was transforming Seattle's sustainability landscape. The rare times someone made the connection between my maiden name and R. Carter Consulting, I'd laugh it off as a coincidence. Carter's a common name, I'd say. I wish I had their patents. Meanwhile, the small team at Northwest who communicated directly with R. Carter knew the consultant as intensely private, communicating only through secure channels and legal intermediaries. Grace was the exception, my Stanford roommate who'd been with me since the beginning. She understood why I'd chosen this peculiar double life, even if she didn't fully approve. What Daniel never saw was the network I'd built around us. Marcus Bennett ran security for Northwest with military precision, reporting unusual access patterns directly to me. A safeguard Grace had insisted on after noticing Daniel's tendency to bring in consultants without proper vetting. Henry Thompson, the company's lead counsel, had worked with my father before his death and had structured both the licensing agreements and my personal life with labyrinthine care. The prenuptial agreement Daniel thought protected his company assets had actually been designed by Henry to shield my patents and intellectual property while appearing standard to Daniel's less experienced personal attorney. The world I'd built was one of mirrors and carefully managed perceptions. I'd created a life where I could experience what I craved most, being valued for myself rather than my innovations, while protecting the technology I'd sacrificed everything to build. Until Daniel shattered that careful construction with a consulting contract and a betrayal that threatened both my home and my life's work. Daniel Wilson had always been handsome in that effortless way that opened doors, tall with dark hair that had started graying prematurely at the temples, giving him an air of distinction beyond his years. His confidence wasn't just a personality trait. It was a carefully cultivated resource deployed strategically in boardrooms and investor meetings alike. I'd watched him for 8 years, studying the subtle shift in his posture when addressing tech journalists versus venture capitalists, the way he'd lower his voice slightly when sharing confidential insights, raise it when announcing successful quarters. He played the CEO role with the precision of someone who'd spent his life preparing for the spotlight. "You can't teach presence," he'd once told me while adjusting his tie before a company function. "Either you have it or you don't." His reflection had caught mine in the mirror, his expression softening with that particular blend of affection and condescension he reserved for me. "Like you, honey. You have a way of putting people at ease. It's why you're so good with our investors' spouses." What he meant, of course, was that I knew my place, that I understood the role of corporate spouse, supportive, decorative, unobtrusive, the perfect backdrop against which ambitious men could shine. The first time I saw that look, I should have ended things. Instead, I became curious. How deep did his assumptions run? Was this a man capable of seeing beyond his own preconceptions? Or was he, like so many in tech, content with the comfortable fiction that women existed primarily to facilitate men's success? It became an experiment of sorts, one that extended from our first date to our marriage. I never lied about my background. I did indeed work in engineering. I simply allowed him to fill in the blanks with his assumptions. And those assumptions revealed more about Daniel than any direct question could have. When I mentioned algorithmic improvements affecting my work, he explained basic coding principles to me. When I discussed energy optimization techniques, he simplified the physics as if speaking to a child. When I mentioned the challenges of patent protection, he offered patronizing advice about not worrying about the complicated legal stuff. 8 years of testing, and he had failed consistently, spectacular in his inability to see beyond the narrow role he'd assigned me. Yet there had been moments, flashes of the man I'd hoped he might be. The night he found me working through complex calculations at 3 a.m. and quietly brought me tea instead of questioning my project. The afternoon he defended a female engineer being interrupted in a meeting. Small glimpses of potential awareness that kept me holding on, hoping that eventually he might truly see me. That hope had died gradually, then suddenly, like the adoption curve he'd once mansplained to me during dinner. "Tech companies don't succeed overnight, honey," he'd lectured, sketching a graph on a napkin. "They struggle along the bottom, then shoot upward when they hit critical adoption. That's why timing is everything." The irony wasn't lost on me now. Across from my desk sat Grace Matthews, the antithesis of Daniel in every meaningful way. Where he assumed, she questioned. Where he projected, she observed. As Northwest's CFO, her financial acumen was legendary in the industry, but it was her emotional intelligence that had made her my most trusted ally. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked, her voice calibrated to professional concern with just enough personal warmth. "There are less dramatic ways to handle the situation." I appreciated that she didn't try to soften the betrayal or offer platitudes. Grace dealt in realities, not comforting fictions. "He's bringing his mistress into our home, Grace," I replied, tapping my pen against the patent documentation on my desk. "He's attempting to steal my technology while setting up his new relationship in the house I designed. What would you suggest as an appropriate response?" She arched a perfect eyebrow. "Most people would call a divorce attorney." "I already have, but this isn't just about our marriage. This is about Northwest. Daniel's decision to claim my whole home sustainability system as an in-house development wasn't just a personal betrayal. It threatened everything I'd built. The system represented the culmination of my work, an integrated approach to managing energy consumption across Entire households. Beta tests showed it could reduce average home energy use by 43% while improving comfort and convenience. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough Northwest needed to maintain its industry leadership. But it was my breakthrough, not theirs. Not his. The personal and professional have collided, I continued. I can't separate them now, even if I wanted. Grace nodded, the gesture acknowledging both the practical and emotional dimensions of my statement. Marcus has confirmed they've already started moving her things in, she said quietly. The security logs show her accessing your home 3 times today while you were at the coffee shop working. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. This was about Olivia Jenkins, the wellness consultant with the suspiciously vague credentials and the conspicuously perfect timing, walking through my home, evaluating my spaces, preparing to replace me. Tomorrow's board meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. Grace continued. I've moved it to the main conference room rather than the executive suite as Daniel requested. Better sightlines, better acoustics. Better for the dramatic revelation I was planning, she didn't need to add. I nodded, turning to the rain-streaked windows overlooking the lake. Somewhere across that water, in one of Seattle's gleaming downtown towers, decisions were being made about Northwest's future, about my technology, about sustainability innovations that would ultimately come back to my algorithms, to my authority, just as Daniel's future would. Maintain current access protocols, but activate the secondary monitoring system in the house, I instructed. I want to see exactly what they do next. After Grace departed, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, watching lightning flash across the Seattle skyline. In the reflection of my office windows, I could see both versions of myself superimposed, Rebecca the wife and R. Carter the innovator, merging into one unified image. Tomorrow, Daniel would finally see the same. The morning of the board meeting dawned gray and misty over Lake Washington. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with calculations, contingencies, and the quiet rage that had settled deep in my chest. From my bedroom window, I could see Daniel's Tesla still parked in the driveway alongside an unfamiliar white Range Rover, Olivia's car, I presumed. They had returned late from dinner, long after I'd retreated to my private rooms on the 3rd floor. I showered and dressed with methodical precision, selecting a charcoal gray suit I'd purchased in Milan but never worn around Daniel. The Rebecca Wilson he knew favored soft silks and casual elegance, clothing that complemented his image without competing for attention. Today called for something different: structured shoulders, crisp lines, subtle authority. I paired it with the emerald earrings my father had given me upon completing my degrees. A flash of color against the monochrome, a reminder of why I'd built my algorithms in the first place. By 7:15, I was in my office reviewing the documentation Grace had compiled overnight. The evidence of contract violations was comprehensive. Internal emails showing Northwest developers acknowledging they were reverse engineering Carter's system. Meeting minutes where Daniel instructed the team to recreate the functionality without triggering the licensing terms. Even a product roadmap listing dependencies removed from Carter Tech by Q3 as a key milestone. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Everything prepared. Thompson briefed. Board members arriving early for coffee. Downtown traffic would be heavy this morning. I needed to leave soon if I wanted to arrive before the meeting began. One last thing to do first. I descended to the main floor of our home, moving silently through spaces that suddenly felt foreign. The house smelled different, an unfamiliar perfume lingering in the air, mingling with the scent of coffee I hadn't brewed. In the kitchen, I found them. Daniel at the island scrolling through his phone, Olivia at the counter pouring a smoothie into a glass. They both froze when they noticed me standing in the doorway. Becca. Daniel recovered quickly, his expression shifting to the carefully neutral smile he used during difficult negotiations. I was going to wake you. We need to talk about the new arrangements. Olivia turned toward me, her smile professional but her eyes assessing. She was younger than me, early 30s perhaps, with the polished appearance of someone who invested considerable time in self-presentation. Her workout clothes looked more suitable for Instagram than actual exercise. "Good morning, Rebecca," she said with practiced warmth. "I hope you don't mind that I use the blender. I'm preparing morning nutrient supplements for the executive team. I'd be happy to make you one as well. They're designed to optimize cognitive function and stress response." I remained in the doorway, observing them both with clinical detachment. In another life, this moment would have been devastating. Finding another woman making herself at home in my kitchen. My husband behaving as if this intrusion were perfectly normal. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as if seeing the final piece of a complex puzzle click into place. "I have an early meeting," I said simply. "Don't wait for me tonight." Daniel frowned slightly, thrown by my lack of reaction. "Becca, we really should discuss this. Olivia's residence here is temporary, just until the product launch. It's a standard arrangement for key consultants during critical phases." "Is it?" I asked, meeting his gaze directly. "How interesting." I turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Olivia. "You might want to move your car. The landscapers come on Thursdays, and they've been known to scratch vehicles parked in the drive." Her smile faltered slightly. "Daniel said it would be fine there." "Daniel says many things," I replied, allowing the smallest hint of a smile. "That doesn't make them true." I left without waiting for a response, collecting my briefcase and car keys before walking out through the garage. As I backed my Audi out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of them in the kitchen window, Daniel gesturing emphatically, Olivia's posture defensive. The beginning of doubt creeping into their perfect arrangement. The drive into Seattle gave me time to center myself. Rain had cleared overnight, leaving the city gleaming in the morning light, Mount Rainier visible in the distance beyond the downtown skyline. I'd always loved this view, the natural grandeur surrounding human innovation, each complementing the other when in proper balance. It was this harmony I'd sought to capture in my algorithms, the elegant mathematical relationship between consumption and conservation. Northwest Innovations occupied the top 10 floors of a downtown tower, its glass facade designed to maximize natural light while minimizing energy usage. One of the first large-scale implementations of my technology. The company logo, a stylized compass rose with a digital circuit board pattern, adorned the entrance lobby where a security guard greeted me with a polite nod. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, holding the door. "Thank you, Jim. How's your daughter doing at college?" He beamed. "Made the dean's list her first semester. That scholarship from the STEM program you recommended made all the difference." This was the other side of my compartmentalized life. The small kindnesses I could extend as the CEO's wife. The connections I could facilitate. The opportunities I could create without revealing my technical expertise. I'd established a scholarship fund through my LLC for employees' children pursuing technical education, knowing how my own father's encouragement had shaped my path. In the elevator ascending to the executive floor, I checked my reflection in the polished doors, composed, professional, determined. The woman looking back at me wasn't Rebecca Wilson, supportive spouse, nor was she entirely the reclusive R. Carter. She was someone new, the integration of both identities, strengthened by the reconciliation of my divided self. The executive floor hummed with morning activity, assistants preparing conference rooms, analysts reviewing overnight data, the familiar rhythm of a company coming to life. Several employees greeted me with surprise as I walked past the reception area toward the main boardroom. While I occasionally visited for company functions, my presence on a regular business day was unusual enough to draw notice. Outside the boardroom, I found Grace waiting, tablet in hand, dressed in a navy suit that complemented mine in its understated authority. Her quick assessment took in everything: my outfit, my expression, my resolute posture. "You're ready," she said. It wasn't a question. "Completely." "Daniel just texted he's stuck in traffic. Asked to delay by 15 minutes. She smiled slightly. "I told him the board members were already here, so we'd need to proceed." Through the glass walls, I could see them assembled. The 8 members of Northwest Innovation's board of directors. Eleanor Patel, the venture capitalist who'd provided early funding. Thomas Morgan, representing the largest institutional investor. Retired Senator William Chen, whose connections had secured critical government contracts. And 5 others whose collective experience spanned technology, sustainability, and global markets. "Are they prepared?" I asked quietly. Thompson briefed them individually this morning. They know an intellectual property issue has emerged that requires immediate attention. They don't yet know the specific nature or that you're involved. I nodded, appreciating the careful groundwork Grace and our legal counsel had laid. "And the documentation?" "Loaded on the secure server. Each board member has a tablet pre-logged into the system. All evidence is watermarked and access tracked." "Marcus?" "Security is handling Daniel's arrival personally. He'll be escorted directly to the boardroom when he arrives, but not given advance notice of the meeting's content." One final breath to center myself. 8 years of separation between my identities was about to collapse into a single moment of truth. "Let's begin," I said, straightening my shoulders and walking toward the boardroom door. The conversation inside hushed as I entered, surprise registering on several faces. While many had met me at company functions, my presence at a formal board meeting, particularly one called on an emergency basis, was unprecedented. "Mrs. Wilson," Eleanor Patel said, rising slightly in polite acknowledgement. "This is unexpected. Is Daniel joining us?" "He's been delayed in traffic," I replied, moving to the head of the table, a position typically reserved for the CEO. "But given the urgency of today's matter, I suggested to Grace that we should begin without him." Confusion flickered across several faces. Grace closed the door behind us and took a seat to my right, placing her tablet on the table. "With respect," Thomas Morgan said carefully, "while we always appreciate your support of the company, this is a closed board meeting regarding sensitive intellectual property matters." I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes. "Yes, Mr. Morgan, that's precisely why I'm here." I nodded to Grace, who tapped her tablet. The large display, screens around the room illuminated with a simple slide. R. Carter Consulting, LLC, Patent Ownership and Licensing Violations. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and clear, "for those of you who haven't met me in a professional capacity, allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Carter Wilson. I am the founder and sole proprietor of R. Carter Consulting." The silence that followed was absolute. 8 pairs of eyes widened in varying degrees of shock as the implication registered. Eleanor Patel was the first to recover, her analytical mind quickly processing this new information. "You're R. Carter," she said flatly. "The R. Carter whose algorithms form the foundation of our entire technology platform." "Yes. But you're Daniel's wife." "Also yes." Senator Chen leaned forward, brow furrowed. "I don't understand. Daniel has been dealing with R. Carter, with you, for years. How could he not know?" "That," I said, "is an excellent question. One that speaks to the heart of why we're here today." I tapped my own tablet, changing the display to show the original licensing agreement between Northwest Innovations and R. Carter Consulting, signed 6 years earlier, nearly 2 years after Daniel and I had married. When Northwest first approached me about licensing my sustainability algorithms, I chose to maintain my professional identity separate from my personal one. There were many reasons for this decision, including intellectual property protection and a desire to have my work evaluated on its merits, rather than through the lens of personal connection. Thomas Morgan's expression had darkened. Are you saying Daniel doesn't know his own wife created the technology his company is built on? That is correct. That's... He searched for the appropriate word. Extraordinary. What's more extraordinary, I continued, is that despite not knowing my identity, Northwest, under Daniel's direction, is currently attempting to violate our licensing agreement in multiple ways, most significantly by claiming in-house development of technology directly derived from my patents. I advanced to the next slide, showing internal emails outlining the strategy to free Northwest from dependence on Carter's algorithms. For the past 6 months, a team has been working to reverse engineer my whole home sustainability system, with the explicit goal of redesigning it sufficiently to claim it as a Northwest original development, thereby avoiding the royalty structure in our agreement. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from confusion to concern. These were experienced business leaders who understood immediately the legal and financial implications of what I was describing. If verified, this represents a serious breach of contract, Eleanor said, her expression grave. Potentially even intellectual property theft. It is verified, Grace interjected, directing their attention to the tablets before them. The complete documentation is available for your review, including internal communications, development logs, and comparative analysis of the technologies involved. Why bring this to us now? Senator Chen asked, studying me carefully. And in this manner? A fair question that deserved a comprehensive answer. I met his gaze directly. Because as of yesterday, I became aware that Daniel's plans extend beyond professional appropriation to personal betrayal. He has hired a woman named Olivia Jenkins as a wellness consultant, installed her in our home, and appears to be planning to transition both his personal and professional life away from me, while simultaneously attempting to claim ownership of my life's work. The boardroom door opened before anyone could respond. Marcus Bennett entered first, his security team's training evident in how he scanned the room before stepping aside. Behind him came Daniel, his confident stride faltering slightly as he registered my presence at the head of the table. "Sorry I'm late," he said, recovering quickly and flashing his signature smile. Traffic was brutal. His eyes flicked from me to the displays showing the licensing agreement, confusion briefly crossing his features before his professional mask reasserted itself. "Rebecca," he said, his tone perfectly calibrated to convey affectionate puzzlement, mixed with slight concern. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." 8 years of observing him had taught me to recognize this particular performance, the careful modulation that suggested I might be slightly out of place, but he was too polite to say so directly. It was the same tone he used when I offered technical opinions at dinner parties. "Actually," Eleanor Patel said before I could respond, "your wife was just explaining something quite remarkable to us." She emphasized the word wife slightly. "Perhaps you'd like to take a seat, Daniel. I believe we all have questions." Daniel's smile remained fixed, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes as he assessed the room, the documentation displayed on the screens, the unified attention of the board members, my position at the head of the table. "Of course," he said smoothly, taking the only remaining seat, not his usual place, but one near the middle of the table. Though I'm not sure what Rebecca could be presenting that would require a full board meeting. "Your wife," Thomas Morgan said with deliberate emphasis, "has just informed us that she is R. Carter, the R. Carter whose technology forms the foundation of this company's products." Daniel's laugh was immediate and dismissive. "That's ridiculous. R. Carter is an established engineering consultant with advanced degrees and proprietary algorithms developed over decades. Rebecca has a basic understanding of programming but hasn't worked in the field since before we met." The condescension in his voice was so familiar, so expected, that I felt an odd sense of validation. Even now, faced with direct contradiction, From the board, his default was to dismiss my capabilities. Actually, I said quietly, I have dual degrees in environmental engineering and computer science from MIT, an MBA from Stanford, and 16 patents registered between 2012 and 2022. My father was Dr. Robert Carter of the National Environmental Research Institute. We developed the initial sustainability algorithm together before his death. Daniel stared at me, disbelief warring with growing alarm as he processed my words. That's impossible, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I would have known. Would you? I asked, holding his gaze. When have you ever asked about my work, my education, my professional background? When have you ever viewed me as anything other than your supportive wife? The boardroom had gone completely silent, the collective discomfort palpable as they witnessed this collision of personal and professional worlds. Daniel's expression shifted rapidly between confusion, disbelief, and the first flickers of comprehension as the implications began to dawn on him. If this is true, he said slowly, why hide it? Why maintain this? Deception for 8 years. Of marriage? It was the question I'd anticipated, the one that attempted to shift focus from his actions to mine. Before I could answer, Eleanor Patel interjected. While the personal aspects of this situation are certainly complex, she said with the precision of someone accustomed to redirecting difficult conversations, our immediate concern must be the apparent attempt to circumvent licensing agreements and appropriate intellectual property developed by R. Carter Consulting. She turned to Daniel, her expression hardening. Daniel, these documents suggest you've been directing a systematic effort to replicate proprietary technology in violation of our contractual obligations. Is this accurate? Daniel's training as a CEO surfaced immediately: deny, deflect, minimize. These allegations are being presented without context. Yes, we've been working to enhance our in-house capabilities, but always within the bounds of our agreements. Any similarity to existing technologies would be coincidental and non-infringing. Coincidental? Grace's voice cut through his defense. She tapped her tablet, bringing up a new document on the displays. This is an email from you to the development team, dated 3 months ago. It specifically instructs them to, and I quote, recreate the functional elements of Carter's system without triggering the patent infringement clauses. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at me, then back at the board members, reading the room and recognizing the deteriorating situation. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on the reasonable, problem-solving tone he used to navigate corporate crises. Clearly, there's been a serious misunderstanding here. If Rebecca is indeed connected to R. Carter Consulting, we should discuss this privately and determine the appropriate path forward. This isn't an issue that requires board intervention at this stage. I disagree, I said calmly. This is precisely an issue that requires board intervention, because it involves potential intellectual property theft, contract violations, and misuse of company resources, including the hiring of Olivia Jenkins. Daniel's expression flickered at the mention of Olivia's name. Ms. Jenkins is a legitimate wellness consultant brought on to support executive performance during a critical product launch. Is that why her contract includes a housing allowance specifically designating our home as her residence? Is that why she moved in yesterday without any prior discussion with me? Is that why her professional background shows no relevant qualifications for the role you've created for her? The personal had crashed into the professional, the carefully compartmentalized aspects of our lives colliding in spectacular fashion. Daniel's composure was cracking, the implications of his position becoming increasingly clear to everyone in the room. Senator Chen cleared his throat. I believe we need to address these issues separately. The intellectual property matter has clear legal and financial implications for the company that require immediate action. The personal situation between you and Mrs. Wilson, or Ms. Carter, is concerning but secondary to our fiduciary responsibilities. Agreed, Eleanor Patel said. Daniel, given the documentation presented, I move that we temporarily suspend the development of the whole home system until legal counsel can provide a comprehensive assessment of our position. I second the aye.
Motion,
Thomas Morgan added promptly. Daniel looked from face to face, finding no allies among the board members who had previously supported his every initiative. This is unnecessary and potentially damaging to our market position. We have launch commitments to partners, which were made based on technology. You apparently don't have the rights to, Eleanor countered. Better to address this now than face a lawsuit and public relations disaster later. The vote was quick and unanimous. The whole home system development would be paused pending legal review. Daniel sat rigidly in his chair, the full scale of the professional implications beginning to register. There's also the matter of Ms. Jenkins's contract and the apparent misuse of company resources for personal purposes, Thomas Morgan said, turning toward Henry Thompson, who had remained silent until now, observing the proceedings with a lawyer's careful attention. Based on the documentation provided, Thompson said, his silver hair catching the light as he leaned forward, there appears to be a concerning pattern of resource allocation that benefits Mr. Wilson personally rather than the company. The Jenkins contract is particularly problematic. The role is ill-defined, the compensation excessive, and the housing arrangement unusual, to say the least. Daniel's face had flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. These are operational decisions within my authority as CEO. The board doesn't typically involve itself in staffing matters at this level. We do when they involve potential conflicts of interest or misuse of funds, Eleanor replied sharply, particularly when combined with other concerning behavior. The walls were closing in, the carefully constructed world Daniel had built beginning to collapse. I watched him with clinical detachment, noting the subtle tells that signaled his growing desperation, the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tap of his index finger against his thigh, the way he swallowed before speaking. I think we need to step back and consider the source of these allegations, he said, attempting to regain control of the narrative. My wife has apparently maintained a secret identity for our entire marriage, deliberately concealing her connection to our key technology partner. That deception calls into question her motivations and the reliability of her claims. It was a predictable pivot, attack the credibility of the accuser rather than address the substance of the accusations. Had anticipated this moment, prepared for it throughout the sleepless night. My identity as R. Carter is easily verifiable, I said calmly. The patent registrations, the original algorithmic development documentation, the authenticated communications with Northwest's technical team over the years, all confirm exactly who I am and what I've created. My choice to keep my professional and personal lives separate doesn't change the facts of what's happening now. I turned my attention to the board members. I didn't come here today to create upheaval or damage the company. Quite the opposite. My technology is deeply integrated with Northwest's products, and I have a vested interest in seeing the company succeed. But I cannot allow my work to be stolen or misrepresented, nor can I remain silent about the misuse of corporate resources for personal agenda. Eleanor Patel studied me carefully. What outcome are you seeking, Ms. Carter? The question hung in the air, weighted with significance. This was the moment toward which everything had been building. The culmination of years of divided existence, of watching from the shadows as my innovations transformed an industry without my name attached to them, of maintaining the charade of the supportive wife, while my husband explained my own technology to me. I want 3 things, I said, my voice steady. First, full recognition of R. Carter Consulting's intellectual property rights and strict adherence to our existing licensing agreements. Second, a formal review of Daniel's leadership decisions over the past year, specifically those related to technology development and personnel. And third, I paused, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. A clear separation between Northwest Innovations and my personal life going forward. Daniel's expression had gone completely still, the implications of my words sinking in. This wasn't just about the company or the technology. It was about the end of our marriage, announced in the boardroom where he had built his professional identity. "You can't do this," he said quietly. "I already have." Thomas Morgan cleared his throat. "I believe we need to call an executive session to discuss these matters fully. Daniel, given the nature of the allegations and the clear conflict of interest, I must ask that you recuse yourself from this portion of the meeting." Daniel looked around the table, reading the unified front presented by the board members. Whatever defense he might have mounted had been thoroughly undermined by the evidence before them and the calm certainty of my presentation. "This is my company," he said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "I built it from nothing." "No," I corrected gently. "You built it on my algorithms, with my innovation at its core. You just never bothered to look closely enough to see who was really behind them." The silence that followed was profound. 8 years of marriage, 6 years of professional connection, countless moments of dismissal and underestimation, all crystallized in this single exchange. Marcus Bennett stepped forward from his position near the door. "Mr. Wilson, the board has requested an executive session. I'll escort you to your office." Daniel rose slowly, his movements stiff with suppressed emotion. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at me, searching my face as if seeing me truly for the first time. "Was any of it real?" he asked quietly. It was a more complex question than he likely intended, laden with layers of meaning that extended beyond our marriage to the very nature of authenticity in a life divided. "All of it was real," I answered truthfully. "You just never saw all of me." After he departed, escorted by Marcus, the atmosphere in the boardroom shifted subtly. The tension remained, but it had transformed from the shock of revelation to the practical considerations of moving forward. "That," Eleanor Patel said after a moment, "was unlike any board meeting I've ever attended." A ripple of nervous laughter broke the remaining tension. These were experienced business leaders accustomed to corporate drama, but the personal element had added a dimension few had encountered in their professional lives. "Ms. Carter, or Mrs. Wilson," Thomas Morgan began, stumbling slightly over how to address me. "Rebecca is fine," I offered with a small smile. "Or Dr. Carter, if you prefer formality." "Dr. Carter, then," he acknowledged with a nod. "While I believe I speak for the board in expressing concern about the intellectual property issues you've raised, I must ask, why reveal yourself now in this manner? Surely there were less dramatic ways to address these concerns." It was a fair question deserving a thoughtful answer. I took a moment to consider my response, aware that how I framed my motivation would significantly influence their perception of me moving forward. When I first created the technology that would become Northwest's foundation, I made a deliberate choice to separate my personal identity from my professional work. The tech industry hasn't always been kind to women innovators, and I wanted my algorithms judged on their merits, not filtered through preconceptions about gender or age. Several board members nodded in understanding, particularly Eleanor, and Senator Chen's wife, both of whom had navigated male-dominated industries themselves. When I met Daniel, he immediately categorized me based on superficial impressions. Even after we married, he never truly saw me as an intellectual equal or professional peer. I allowed that misperception to continue, partly out of scientific curiosity about how long it could persist, and partly because it provided a unique perspective on how my technology was being implemented. I paused, considering how to explain the complex evolution of my choice. Over time, I began to consider revealing my identity, merging my professional achievements with my personal life. But then I discovered the attempts to circumvent my patents, followed by the introduction of Olivia Jenkins into our home, Clearly not just a professional colleague, but someone with whom Daniel has developed a personal relationship. My voice remained steady, though the words carried the weight of recent betrayal. The combination forced my hand. I couldn't allow my work to be stolen while simultaneously being replaced in my own home. So yes, this revelation could have been handled differently under other circumstances. But given the urgency and the dual nature of the threat, I chose direct action. Eleanor Patel studied me thoughtfully. An understandable position. And now that we're aware of the situation, we need to determine appropriate next steps for the company. For the next hour, the board engaged in a detailed discussion of the legal, financial, and strategic implications of my revelation. Henry Thompson provided an assessment of the intellectual property issues, while Grace outlined the financial impact of various scenarios. Throughout, I offered insights into the technology itself and potential paths forward that would protect both my innovations and Northwest's market position. By the session's end, 3 key decisions had been reached. Daniel would be placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation of the intellectual property allegations and potential misuse of company resources. A formal review of all R. Carter consulting agreements would be conducted to ensure proper compliance moving forward. And I would be asked to consult directly with the technical team to evaluate the current state of the whole home system development. One final question, Senator Chen said as the meeting concluded. Given your unique position as both the technology creator and, for now at least, the wife of our CEO, what role do you envision for yourself with Northwest going forward? It was the question I'd been expecting since the moment I'd decided to reveal myself, the logical endpoint of collapsing my carefully compartmentalized identities into one unified whole. The answer had crystallized during those sleepless hours, watching rain streak across my office windows, imagining a future where I no longer lived divided. I believe Northwest Innovations is at a critical juncture, I said, meeting each board member's gaze in turn. The company has built its reputation on transformative sustainable technology, but the full potential of my algorithms has yet to be realized. With proper direction, transparent leadership, and ethical application, this company could fundamentally change how we approach energy consumption and environmental impact. I straightened slightly in my chair, allowing my full expertise and vision to show through in a way I'd carefully subdued for years. I didn't come here today seeking Daniel's position. However, if the board determines that new leadership is required following your investigation, I would be prepared to discuss a more formal role that aligns my technical expertise with the company's strategic direction. Eleanor and Thomas exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years serving together on multiple boards. We'll take that under advisement, Eleanor said carefully. In the meantime, we'd appreciate your continued cooperation with the review process. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out with murmured acknowledgments, their expressions suggesting they were still processing the morning's revelations. Grace remained behind, waiting until the room had cleared before approaching me. That, she said with quiet emphasis, was masterfully done. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, the accumulated tension of the past 24 hours finally beginning to dissipate. "How are you feeling?" she asked, studying. My face with the insight of long friendship. "Lighter," I admitted, as if I've set down something I've been carrying for years. Grace nodded in understanding. "And what now? Will you go home?" Home. The word carried complicated associations after yesterday's discoveries. My space invaded. My marriage effectively ended. My carefully constructed world fundamentally altered. "No," I said after a moment's consideration. "I think it's time I stayed somewhere that's truly mine." I would go to the cabin on San Juan Island, the property I'd purchased through my LLC 3 years earlier, a place Daniel knew nothing about, where I'd installed my most advanced prototype of the whole home system and spent occasional weekends at conferences, developing the next iterations of my algorithms. A place where I had never been divided, never diminished, never less than my complete self. As we left the boardroom, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass walls, poised, composed, whole. The woman looking back at me was neither Rebecca Wilson nor R. Carter exclusively, but the integrated being I had always been beneath the careful compartmentalization. For 8 years I had allowed Daniel to believe he was married to a shadow of who I really was. Today, the full reality had dawned on him with the harsh clarity of truth he'd been too arrogant to see. He had invited his mistress into our home, thinking he was pushing me aside for someone more valuable to his future. He had no idea that the future of everything he'd built now rested in my hands. 1 month after the boardroom confrontation, I stood on the deck of my San Juan Island cabin, watching eagles circle above the evergreens as sunset painted the sky in watercolor strokes of orange and purple. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the professional whirlwind of the past 30 days, days filled with legal depositions, technical reviews, and strategic planning sessions that would determine the future of Northwest Innovations. The cabin had become my sanctuary during this transition, a place where the integration of my formerly divided identities could unfold naturally, away from the scrutiny of colleagues still adjusting to the revelation that the CEO's wife was actually the technological genius behind their company's success. Here, surrounded by the natural beauty that had inspired my sustainability algorithms, I could think clearly about what came next. My phone vibrated against the wooden railing. Grace's familiar ringtone. I answered, still gazing out at the water. "The board just adjourned," she said without preamble. "It's official. Daniel has been removed as CEO, effective immediately." Though I'd been expecting this outcome, hearing it confirmed sent a complex wave of emotions washing over me. Not satisfaction or triumph, but something more nuanced. The end of one chapter, the beginning of another. "How did he take it?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. After everything, I still found myself curious about his reactions, his adaptations, his understanding of the situation he'd created. "About as well as you'd expect," Grace replied. "Insisted until the end that he was the victim of deception, that the intellectual property allegations were exaggerated, that the company was making a catastrophic mistake." Eleanor finally cut him off and had security escort him from the building. I could picture it clearly. Daniel's carefully calibrated indignation, his attempt to reframe the narrative until the very end. The man I'd watched for 8 years, studying his performances in different contexts, would not surrender his self-perception easily, no matter how thoroughly the evidence contradicted it. "And the vote for the new leadership?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Grace and I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, evaluating options, building consensus among board members, ensuring the transition would protect both the company's market position and my intellectual property rights. "Unanimous," Grace confirmed. "Rebecca Carter Wilson, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Technology Officer of Northwest Innovations, effective immediately." The words hung in the evening air, weighty with significance. After 8 years of compartmentalization, of watching from the sidelines as my technology transformed an industry, of maintaining the charade of the supportive spouse, I would now step fully into the light, leading the company built on my innovations, guiding the application of my algorithms, shaping the future of sustainable technology with my name attached to my work. "Eleanor wants to schedule a press conference for Monday," Grace continued. "The stock has already responded positively to rumors of the leadership change. Analysts are speculating that bringing in the actual creator of the core technology represents a significant competitive advantage." I smiled slightly at the understatement. Northwest's market position had strengthened considerably. Once word began circulating that R. Carter, the reclusive technological genius whose algorithms had revolutionized energy management, was not only taking a more active role in the company, but was, in fact, assuming leadership. "What about the whole home system?" I asked. The flagship product that Daniel had attempted to claim as an in-house development had been in limbo since the board suspended all related projects pending the leadership investigation. The technical team is waiting for your direction, Grace said. They've reviewed your original specifications and realized how far off track they'd gone trying to circumvent your patents. Marcus Johnson actually said, and I'm quoting directly, "We were trying to reinvent the wheel when the original designer was available the whole time." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd watched through the carefully constructed barrier of my anonymous consultant role as Northwest's engineers struggled to fully implement the vision embedded in my algorithms. How many times had I wanted to step in directly, to guide them past obstacles I could see clearly from my unique perspective? How many resources had been wasted because Daniel's ego couldn't accommodate the possibility that his wife might understand the technology better than he did? Schedule a technical briefing for Tuesday, I decided. I'll present the complete whole home system architecture, including the elements I've been developing privately. We should be able to accelerate the timeline significantly now that we're not working at cross purposes. As the call ended, I remained on the deck watching the final glow of sunset fade from the horizon, reflecting on the path that had led to this moment. The experiment that had begun 8 years ago, when I allowed Daniel to believe I was less than I was, had yielded results I never anticipated. What had started as self-protection had evolved into a unique window into how innovation could be stifled by assumption and ego, how women's contributions could be systematically undervalued even when they were demonstrably superior. Those lessons would shape my leadership approach moving forward, creating a culture that valued substance over performance, that recognized innovation regardless of its source, that built technology serving genuine human needs rather than market trends or vanity metrics. My phone buzzed again. A text message this time from Henry Thompson. Divorce filing complete. Wilson served this afternoon. No contest expected given circumstances. Another chapter closing. The marriage that had begun with such promise and evolved into such a complex experiment in identity and perception was officially ending. The prenuptial agreement Daniel had signed so casually, believing it protected his superior assets from my potential claims, would now govern the separation of our lives, with very different implications than he had anticipated. I had already moved most of my personal belongings from the Bellevue house to the cabin, and a newly purchased condominium near Northwest's headquarters. Daniel had vacated the property 2 weeks earlier after security cameras captured him attempting to access my private office, presumably searching for leverage to use in the increasingly contentious corporate investigation. Olivia Jenkins had disappeared from Seattle entirely once it became clear that her executive wellness consultant position had been eliminated and her contract deemed a misappropriation of company resources. The smooth surface of the water below my deck rippled as a family of otters played near the shoreline, their playful movements catching the last light of day, nature finding balance, adapting to changing conditions, thriving through transition. Exactly the principles that had informed my sustainability algorithms from the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a leadership transition to navigate, a technology roadmap to realign, a company culture to reshape. But tonight, in this moment of quiet transition between my divided past and integrated future, I allowed myself to fully experience the emotional complexion of this transformation. Not just satisfaction at professional recognition long deferred, but a deeper peace that came from finally uniting the compartmentalized aspects of my identity. Rebecca Carter Wilson, no longer the supportive wife or the anonymous consultant, but the fully realized integration of all I had been and all I would become. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Northwest Innovations' executive suite as I settled behind the desk that had until recently been Daniel's domain. The office had been transformed over the weekend. The dark leather and chrome that had defined his aesthetic replaced with warm woods and subtle blues that better reflected both my personal taste and the sustainable ethos of the company. Family, Photos and sailing memorabilia had given way to my engineering awards, finally brought out of hiding, technical reference books, and a framed photograph of my father and me standing together in his laboratory, taken shortly before his cancer diagnosis. His visionary environmental work had inspired the algorithms that now powered buildings and systems across the globe, a legacy I could finally acknowledge publicly. Grace entered with 2 cups of coffee, handing me one before taking a seat across from me. "Ready for your first official day as CEO?" I smiled, appreciating both the caffeine and her steadying presence during this transition. "As ready as 8 years of watching from the sidelines can make me." "The executive team is assembled in the main conference room," she said, checking her tablet. Most seemed genuinely excited about working directly with the actual creator of the technology. A few of Daniel's closer allies are more reserved, but not openly hostile. "And the developmental teams?" "Practically giddy," Grace replied with a slight smile. "Marcus says the engineers have been speculating all weekend about what other innovations you might have been developing privately. There's a betting pool about which projects will be greenlit first." I laughed, feeling a lightness that had been absent during the years of compartmentalization. No more filtering my ideas through carefully constructed anonymous channels. No more watching teams struggle with implementations I could have easily clarified. No more diminishing my knowledge to maintain a charade of supportive ignorance. "Let's not keep them waiting," I said, gathering my tablet and the presentation I'd finalized over the weekend. The walk to the conference room felt different now. Employees, nodding respectfully rather than greeting me with the polite confusion that had previously accompanied the CEO's wife appearing in professional spaces. News of my dual identity had spread quickly throughout the company, transforming perceptions overnight. Where once I had been seen as a pleasant background figure at company functions, I was now viewed with a mixture of awe and curiosity, the technological genius who had hidden in plain sight. As we approached the conference room, I could see the executive team through the glass walls. 15 men and women who led various divisions of Northwest Innovations, some of whom had worked closely with R. Carter for years without ever knowing, who was behind the technical specifications and patent documents. Conversations hushed as I entered, all eyes turning toward me with varying degrees of surprise, respect, and reassessment. These were experienced professionals in a rapidly evolving industry, adaptable by necessity. But the revelation that the CEO's wife was actually the technological foundation of the company had upended their understanding of the corporate hierarchy they navigated daily. "Good morning," I began, taking my place at the head of the table. "I appreciate you all being here for what represents a significant transition for Northwest Innovations." For the next hour, I outlined my vision for the company moving forward, the accelerated development of the whole home sustainability system, the expansion of our commercial applications, and a renewed focus on integrating our technologies into municipal infrastructure. Questions came tentatively at first, then with increasing engagement as the team adjusted to the reality that the person addressing them possessed both intimate knowledge of the company's technology and a comprehensive vision for its future. "Dr. Carter," said Michael Chen, head of product development, using the professional title I had reclaimed along with my identity, "the specifications you're describing for the whole home system go far beyond what our team believed was currently possible. Are you certain the technology is ready for market implementation?" I smiled, appreciating both his directness and the opportunity it presented. "The technology has been ready for 18 months, Mr. Chen. I've been running a fully functional prototype in my private residence since then, gathering performance data and refining the algorithms based on real-world implementation." Surprise rippled through the room. "But the development team has been struggling with core functionality issues that seemed insurmountable," he replied, confusion evident in his expression. "Yes," I acknowledged, "because they were working from incomplete specifications and attempting to reverse engineer elements of the system rather than building on the full architectural framework I had already developed." an unfortunate consequence of the previous leadership's decision to try to circumvent the licensing agreements with R. Carter Consulting. Understanding dawned across multiple faces: the technical roadblocks, the strained deadlines, the increasingly frustrated directives from Daniel to find another way, all suddenly contextualized by this revelation. Moving forward, I continued, we'll be implementing a more transparent and collaborative development process. My complete technical documentation will be made available to the appropriate teams, and I'll be directly involved in guiding implementation rather than communicating through the filtered channels previously established. Relief was palpable among the technical leaders, while some of the marketing and sales executives exchanged concerned glances, their carefully constructed timelines and promises to partners suddenly in flux with this new reality. This represents an unprecedented opportunity, I added, addressing their unspoken concerns. Northwest is now the only company in our sector with the original creator of our core technology directly guiding future development. The market has already responded positively to this alignment. Our challenge now is to leverage this advantage while maintaining the trust of our partners during this transition. By the meeting's end, even the most hesitant executives had begun to engage with the possibilities this new arrangement presented. The initial shock was giving way to calculated assessment of opportunities, to revised strategies incorporating this fundamental shift in the company's positioning. As the team departed, Grace remained behind, studying me with the insight of long friendship. That went well, she observed. You've been preparing for this moment longer than they realize. 8 years of watching from the periphery, I acknowledged, observing how decisions were made, which approaches gained traction, which personalities dominated discussions. It provided a unique perspective. And Daniel, any word? I shook my head. Nothing direct. Henry says his lawyer has requested an extension on responding to the divorce filing, likely buying time to assess his position now that the board's decision is official. Grace's expression reflected concern mixed with pragmatic assessment. He won't go quietly. His entire identity was built around being the visionary CEO who transformed the energy management industry. An identity built on claiming credit for someone else's innovation? I reminded her, though without bitterness. The time for anger had passed, replaced by clear-eyed evaluation of the situation and its resolution. The evidence is comprehensive. The board's decision unanimous. His options are limited. People with limited options sometimes make desperate choices, Grace cautioned. She wasn't wrong. Daniel's carefully constructed self-image had been shattered completely. His professional reputation damaged by the intellectual property violations, his marriage ending due to his attempted betrayal, his future suddenly unmoored from the trajectory he had planned. Men with his particular blend of ambition and entitlement rarely accepted such reversals without attempting to reassert control. Security has been enhanced at all locations, I assured her. Marcus has implemented the protocols we discussed, including monitoring of all access to company systems and facilities. What I didn't add was that I had anticipated this moment from the beginning. From the first time Daniel had dismissed my technical input without consideration, from the gradual recognition that his perception of me was fixed regardless of evidence to the contrary. The structural protections I had built around my intellectual property, my financial independence, and ultimately my identity, had always included contingency plans for this potential outcome. My phone buzzed with a notification, the press conference, announcing my appointment as CEO had been scheduled for 2 p.m. that afternoon. The public phase of this transformation was about to begin, bringing with it a new set of challenges and opportunities. We should prepare your statement, Grace suggested, already shifting to the next priority with her characteristic efficiency. As we worked through the messaging that would introduce Rebecca Carter Wilson to the world, as both the creator of groundbreaking sustainability algorithms and the new leader of Northwest Innovations, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this point. The careful compartmentalization that had begun as self-protection had evolved into a unique window into how institutions functioned, how innovation could be simultaneously celebrated and constrained, how perception shaped reality until reality finally reasserted itself. Those lessons would inform not just the press conference ahead, but the leadership approach I would bring to Northwest moving forward, creating systems that valued substance over performance, that recognized innovation regardless of its source, that built technology serving genuine human needs rather than reinforcing existing power structures. The phoenix of my fully integrated identity was rising from the ashes of my compartmentalized past, stronger and more purposeful for having observed the world from both inside and outside the centers of power. Daniel had brought his mistress into our home, never imagining that his wife was the technological foundation upon which his entire career had been built. Now that foundation would support a new structure, one designed with clear intention and authentic purpose by the woman he had never truly seen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.